made a mistake. Where's the...
Which one? Oh,
we are
an IO. The audio.
Where's the audio?
Right there.
Okay. So
yeah, we gotta pull the audio from that rather than the
on board. USB audio. Okay, good. That is working now. Fortunately, it was preset to that, so we should be good to go.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna redo this here.
Okay.
Activate
We're
flash.
good. Yep, we are live over there.
Remember.
So
I'm gonna post.
I will mute that or pause that.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to Brain Swap.
Good old technical difficulties, which we have now resolved.
Yeah, within a minute.
Technical difficulties within our control, which is a nice
No dead air
difference. Yes. Yeah. So today we are talking about Hayao Miyazaki.
Hayao.
The famed Japanese.
Isn't he the guy that
director.
does all the anime movies?
It seems like it.
Are there movies that aren't done by him?
There are quite a few, actually. But yeah, he's definitely the one everyone knows about. He did Nausicaa, the Valley of Wind, and The Castle Cagliostro, and Castle in the Sky, Porco Rosso, Spirited Away, Ponyo, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, The Wind Rises. Very well-respected director. And he has moved away from films. I'm always hesitant to say he's retired, since he said he was retiring when Princess Mononoke was done. And that was 15 years and like 4 movies ago. So, you know, I never quite trust him when he says he's retired, but he's certainly not actively working on a film right now. Which brings up the question, who is the next Hayao Miyazaki, if anyone? Will anyone take over his place as the reigning king, or indeed queen, of anime filmmaking? Now, I should point out that I mentioned anime filmmaking. That is a somewhat contentious phrasing from Miyazaki's perspective. He does not consider himself to be making anime.
Oh.
He makes animated films. He doesn't like anime in the sense that
confined by the
right. He feels that that anime refers to cheap television animation, more or less, and he has a very different approach to how he makes animated films. And indeed, his films really don't fit into the anime style, the anime visual style, except in very broad or otherwise minor ways. So when you look at how anime is structured as animation in terms of its visual cliches and its tropes and such, he really doesn't use many of those. But point being, he's certainly within that milieu. Whether he considers it or not, I think it's fair to call him an anime director. And so the question is, are we going to see more, or are we going to see somebody else take over as that, that person who everybody looks at as the premier anime director, and somebody who makes popular anime films, especially for families? Who can take over that spot? Do you think there's anyone out there?
Well, now his studio has been going for quite a while.
True.
And we've seen in the changing soap opera of business, studios come, studios go, they get absorbed, they get combined, their assets get sent off to another place, or dissolved completely. And so the potential for disruption in the business side of it seem pretty great. But not having a pillar of anime, even though he doesn't prefer to call it anime, it's mostly the anime community that follows.
Sure.
But there's spillover with Disney. So he's a pillar in the animation community.
Exactly.
And if he does retire, is the studio going to carry on? Is that going to leave a gap? Is it going to give potential for other people to jump in and compete with the studio that currently exists? Are there going to be spin-off studios?
And I know he's talked about the struggle with that. within Studio Ghibli, no one really wants to take over as Hayao Miyazaki because those are such huge
How are you
shoes
gonna
to fill.
fill those shoes? Yeah.
Right. And no one wants to sit up and say, well, I'm the next Hayao Miyazaki.
It's like setting yourself up for failure. I'm the next Einstein.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm the next Da Vinci. Yeah, that's tricky to do.
And they've tried doing that in the past with works like Ocean Waves, aka I Can Hear the Sea, which was meant to be the project with the new guard of Studio Ghibli, if you will, but it never really took off. And other films like Whisper of the Heart was done with one of the senior animators there directing, but they just haven't really been able to bring up a new generation within Studio Ghibli. Now, that's worth going back and kind of seeing how Studio Ghibli is structured. Ghibli is a little unusual in that it was sort of formed around Hayao Miyazaki and his friends Isao Takahata and Toshio Suzuki to make films for them. So they were able to make Nausicaa, the Valley of Wind, based off of Miyazaki's original idea. And that was before Ghibli existed. But with that staff, they were then able to form Studio Ghibli as a vehicle for making the films they wanted to make. So you've seen Miyazaki and his friend Takahata make Miyazaki's films and Takahata's films like Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbors is the Yamadas and Princess Kaguya. And it's really difficult to it's difficult for Ghibli to come up with a new identity when it was really built for Miyazaki and Takahata. It's there to make their films, and since nobody else is stepping forward to do that, there's certainly a lot of folks there with a lot of skills, but what are they going to do? What is their mission now that there's no head, if you will?
Well, it seems like every time I start researching an anime, somebody is an alum of the studio.
Yeah.
So the potential for somebody taking that knowledge and rebuilding it possibly in their own image
Sure.
is pretty high. And where there's a vacuum, something's going to fill it. Will it be better? Will it not? That's it's hard to tell because the directions that it can take are manifold. I mean, do you get somebody who's going to say, yes, we are definitely anime hardcore and we're going to go for the otakus?
Oh, yeah.
Or are you going to get somebody who's going to say, no, we're more animation based. We're going to go Disney-esque or world pictures because that's market driven. Are you going to get somebody market driven, fan driven, story driven? And how much, even if there's one person who's driving that, how much backing are they going to have and need to actually push through a new empire? Basically, are we going to see the kingdom break into several fractions and then like Liquid Snake here says, it's like asking who would be the next Walt Disney. It's almost it's almost one of those impossible questions,
right?
And we've seen other studios in the US arise, but nothing like that original Walt Disney. I mean, they're the big ones on the block, and so everybody else who comes up against it, they have to define their own style to some degree. Otherwise, they're called Disney-esque, but they don't have the horsepower that is still within Disney. So with Miyazaki retiring, are they going to keep the studio going? Are they going to have a second guard that takes the leadership, or is it going to be is it going to dissolve?
Well, they've already announced that they're working on new projects. They're actually working on I believe it was a European co-production for a new film.
European?
Yes, which happens a lot actually with anime. But the big question is, are they going to become like so many other anime studios where they're often assisting other productions? They are working on other things, but they're not doing as much original works. That's a thing. The other question, too, getting to your point about filling that vacuum, is there a long-term vacuum? Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli in general makes these successful family films. The problem is no one else at Studio Ghibli is able to bring in the kind of money Miyazaki does.
And
So-
that money really helps add to the quality.
Right.
You put in the money and the time, you get a quality product.
Yeah.
No guarantee, but
Mm-hmm.
under proper management.
And that's the problem, is that Ghibli faces this situation where Miyazaki is has been their only breadwinner, roughly speaking. So without him there, they can continue making things, but could they make those sorts of quality, broad family films? Is anyone going to show up to see them?
That's a really good point, because if they don't develop a world market view and distribution for families, which are usually the ones who will pay for something over all our pirates out there. The possibility of the studio could go in some, or studios as they fractionalize, could go into several different directions. You could get studios trying to operate the same model on a lower budget. You could get studios going a different direction, but still having that large budget. And depending upon how much backing, I think if they can develop the international contacts and support, they can get the funding to do the quality projects.
Maybe the main issue is that nobody else has ever managed to do that.
That's the tricky
thing,
part.
is that anime is in this very unique situation where they make a lot of stuff for this specific otaku market, and Miyazaki has managed to forge a path outside of that.
Perhaps that's why he says, I don't just do anime.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. He's not making stuff for otaku, certainly. So it's hard to see. So Liquid asks in the chat room very wisely, since not every Ghibli movie is Miyazaki directed, what are the other Ghibli directors doing now? And are they trying to fill in that space? Well, that isn't indeed the thing. That isn't happening. So Whisper the Heart, again, as we said, was one of the big ones. Unfortunately, the director of that passed away a while after the film came out. Other than that, there was the director of Ocean Waves, and he moved on to do other things. This is the other issue. And then we have Goro Miyazaki, of course, who did 2 Studio Ghibli films. But as far as I can tell, he did those more because the films were in pre-production and somebody needed to take over and somebody needed to direct them, and no one else was agreeing to do it. So he stepped in to do it. Goro, as far as I can tell, does not have a strong internal passion to make anime films. He's doing them to keep the studio running, for lack of a better term. Now, I say that as somebody who likes Goro's films. I enjoy both Earthsea, Tales from Earthsea, and Poppy Hill. He has a very different style than his father. But he hasn't had the drive to do original works and to sort of push a movie through. So that's a problem. Then we have the director of Arrietty, The Secret World of Arrietty, who, as far as I know, hasn't done anything else yet. And again, this is the issue, that we have these folks who maybe do one film, but then they back away, and nobody else seems to have Miyazaki's drive. Now, another individual who some people would hold up as the possible next Miyazaki is Mamoru Hosoda. He is the director of, recently Wolf Children, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, and Summer Wars. And he's got The Boy and the Boy and the Something, which is, I think, either just came out or is coming out soon in Japan. And The Boy and the Beast, that's what I'm thinking of. And he certainly does family-friendly films. Summer Wars and all of them really are very family, understandable films. They have a little bit of an otaku bent to them, and they tend to be sci-fi or fantasy. But it's certainly something that the people can appreciate. And Hosoda has that drive where he comes out with a new movie every couple of years, and he certainly has that interest in making films that other people like. The issue there is that he's certainly not getting the kinds of money that Miyazaki makes. So Summer Wars made way less than even an average Studio Ghibli film. So he is kind of he's in the same genre, or the same market that Miyazaki was in. He's making the similar kinds of films, but he's certainly not universally recognized as this, world famous director making these films. Now that's a little unfair because he's much earlier in his career than Miyazaki was. Miyazaki was making films back in the 70s. So, Hosoda has a long way to go, if you will, to get to where Miyazaki is or has been.
Well, what's the English spelling of Hosoda's name?
Mamoruhosoda. That's Mamoru Hosoda. Now, Angel of Death in the chat room suggests Miyazaki is Miyazaki. Perhaps we need a new face with a new directing style, a new star with the same drive. And that's an interesting point. It gets to that question of what is Miyazaki's role in the industry? What is he there for lack of a better term? One of the reasons Miyazaki is so remarkable is because he has been that sort of global face of quality anime. When people talk about anime, they can always bring him in and say, here are these films he has done. Kiki's Delivery Service, for example.
Because pretty much everything that he's done that's gotten popular has been pretty high quality.
Exactly. And thanks to Disney, they've pretty much all been made available over here in America, North America, and thus throughout the world. So it's so that is a facet that's going to be incredibly difficult, I think, for somebody else to replicate. Being that go-to guy, if you will, for an author,
and having the same vision for the style, the choices in stories. I mean, we see a very environmental theme running through Miyazaki's work, and somebody may have something that's a little bit more different in mind. I mean, trying to shoot a story to family-oriented audiences, we saw with Walt Disney, a lot of it started out kind of family-oriented, and then it started branching off into a little bit older, more mature audience, young teens and teen, and then we got the diversity of it and the multiple channels, but then they branched off sections and rebranded, so it wasn't necessarily Disney branding directly to target audiences that were of a more mature nature. And will we see something like that potentially? I mean, do you think the vision that Miyazaki has set up for animation from Japan, not necessarily anime, as he's saying, do you think that vision will carry on throughout the studio, or do you think there'll be a conflict, somebody wanting to do more mature themes, something more adult oriented, like Ghost in the Shell is more, little kids are not going to be concerned as much with the politics, not necessarily sexual, but the violence or mental interplay of different forces and things that relate to news, or do you think the vision of family friendly stories that every age can enjoy, or do you think they'll pull it towards younger kids, or teaching, or historical? Yeah, it's impossible to say. I mean, it really comes down to, I don't see Studio Ghibli going in a dramatically different direction in the same way that the Walt Disney Company is straitjacketed in a lot of ways, because if they stray too far from what people perceive of their brand, then people get upset. Your current album wasn't like your last three.
Right. I mean, lest we forget back in the day, remember the Black Hole?
Oh yeah,
Disney film. Back when Disney was trying to sort of break out, and they made all of
science fiction,
these interesting.
Kind of scary as a kid.
Definitely, and when that was the thing, is that they were trying to make films that weren't safe kid films. With that and some of their other films of the time, Tron indeed was an attempt to be more mature, and
very
audiences rebelled. Those films did not do well at the time. And Disney had to kind of find its own way back through the new golden age in the 90s eventually. So I don't see Studio Ghibli straying too far off that path, and especially in a country like Japan, where folks have a strong understanding of the values built up by an organization. It's very rare for people to take a strong divergence from that. So as you were saying, the question is, can other people push that further? Can they continue with that goal with their own spirit, with their own desires?
Now they may keep content the same, but style, technical, involving more CG. Who knows?
Yeah.
Are we going to see ultra high definition releases with color gamuts that are far beyond what our current televisions can replicate? Are we going to see anything branching off into the newer technologies of not just 3D, but immersive environment? This is a great opportunity for the next generation to take what's available and run with it. And it seems that whenever a well-established system is in place, you don't want to rock the boat if you're under the leadership. But when you're given the reins, there's a lot of ability to change things that may have been percolating under the surface for years.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see how this pans out, especially when there's a possibility of multiple directors, producers' visions for what direction the company should take. But I'm sure that anybody who doesn't agree with the company, if there's not enough momentum, will start off their own company, take the knowledge they've learned from there and start their spin up.
The larger question too, which we haven't talked about too much here, is the idea that maybe Miyazaki's place, maybe his vision is unique to him. Maybe other people aren't going to follow on to that
because he's got the name, but as soon as he's gone, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that and we're gonna have.
And granted, Ghibli may very well move into a company like Disney was, a while back, where they really weren't making new animated works, and the animated stuff was actually going to die off in the 80s.
Testing the waters in different areas.
Right. And so you may do little animations here and there, but you're mostly working off of your previous works, merchandising, all that kind of stuff. So you're kind of keeping that legacy alive as opposed to building new stuff in the future. That could very well happen with Ghibli, where Miyazaki was this special thing that happened, but there's not going to be a new guard, or there's not going to be a somebody with the exact same position in the industry or the world that he had. And this gets back to the fact that they kind of made the studio for him so that his movies could be made. With him gone, maybe family-friendly, high-quality films just kind of more or less can only be made by Hayao Miyazaki. And we can have folks like Hosoda making similar films, but we're just not going to get those huge summer blockbusters out of his works.
Do you think some of the other lower budget studios will pick up some of the pie, slices of the pie, and maybe do lower budget, family friendly?
I don't see it because they've tried doing it and it never works. It really does not make money.
Unless you have the quality and the distribution and the network.
It's really difficult. There's when you're looking at like anime film box office, and this is things that a lot of folks really don't dive into, don't understand. There just aren't a lot of movies that make money the way Studio Ghibli films do. There's a lot to be said for the fact that Miyazaki is unique. And I am kind of stalling for time here because I'm pulling up some numbers I have here. So anime movie opening weekend box offices for 2009. So in 2009, I built up a list of all of the anime movies that premiered in 2009 and their opening weekend box office. And so that was when the Baro Ariete came out. That made $14 million in its opening weekend. fine. You know,
$14 million.
By Hollywood standards,
That's
it's not a
very
lot,
much. That's
but
a drop in the
by
bucket.
Japanese standards, that's very good. You know, and other countries don't make the kind of money that Hollywood makes.
Yeah,
you know,
Hollywood's
we're a special case. Understood. Then you look down. That was also the same year that Summer Wars came out. It made $1.4 million in its opening weekend. So literally a tenth as much as the Studio Ghibli film did. And folks love that film. And again, I'm not saying anything against it. Now, similarly, that was the same year that Redline came out, which was a fun action adventure movie. That made $137,000 in its opening weekend.
Did that make its money back?
Probably not. Trigun Badlands Rumble made $133,000.
You know, I'd go to these things if they'd publicize them better. And for me, I find out about these things. Well,
this is Japan.
This is Japan, yeah. I mean, here in the U.S., it's
sure.
when it's hard sometimes to find out about it in a timely manner. And that was last weekend. Crap.
Yeah. Well, and also, you know, obviously, we will get an anime film for 1 week.
1 week, if that long.
Exactly, as opposed to over there.
1 night, 2 nights.
But even the big genre or the big franchise works. You know, the Naruto Lost Tower movie only made $1.8 million on its opening weekend. So these other films just don't make significant cash, and they never have. So that's the big issue is finding somewhere else. And to give you an idea, a Miyazaki film would probably make $50 million on its opening weekend. So much even more than Arrietty, for example.
That is huge. So they're not going to reinvent the wheel if they've got a distribution network, a publicity network, and the ability to make these the chain of command and workflow that's required to get these out. So they're not going to reinvent that wheel.
Right. But the point is, that wheel's broken in a sense. You know, Miyazaki is the only one who's able to leverage that to make hugely successful films.
Well, do we think that Miyazaki, as Liquid Snake is mentioning, is passing this knowledge down? Is he preparing somebody, or maybe even grooming somebody for his?
Not that I know of.
Reign.
Well, here's the thing: why would he? And I say that not in
so
a
he doesn't have to
sense.
come out of retirement again.
Well,
I'm fishing.
Here's the thing.
No, we need more anime.
But, Miyazaki doesn't give a flip. Let's be honest. Miyazaki makes these movies because he wants to and because he gets inspired by them. But there ain't nobody who is forcing him to make movies. I mean, Suzuki does kind of push him a little bit. But, I don't think he's consciously passing his knowledge down, because this is all his this is all made for him.
Yeah, his baby.
Right. And so, if Studio Ghibli folds, I think he's Buddhist enough to be fine with that. I don't think he's
not going to try and set it up for future generations.
I haven't seen any indication that he has been doing that deliberately, any deliberate
folding
way.
the paper airplane and setting it sail.
I think his view is, if it continues, okay, but he has no particular horse in that race. His legacy is his films. It's not the studio itself. He cares that he made his films right. Ghibli was a vehicle to do that. And so if that vehicle ends up getting, sold off for scrap, well, then maybe that's what happens.
It's funny. Angel of Death here is curious about, mentioning how little anime movies make. Was curious about the EVA make. And Brent does a panel, several panels, but some of the ones that I've attended, Brent discusses how little money is actually spent on the anime itself, and how many release copies there are in Japan, and why it's so expensive in Japan. And it's amazing. It's almost scary when you start looking at some of the figures on how few copies actually get sold.
Yeah.
And it was shocking for me as an anime fan when he started showing the stats on this. And the people who are involved in the process of making these animes, and you look at the list of names and the studios and all the people involved, you think, well, if they made these many copies and they sold them for this outrageous price, that's still not enough for any of these people to make a living off of this.
Yeah.
How are they surviving?
And, so I've dug into the numbers a little bit. As far as I can tell, and these are some of this is more or less hearsay. So the first Evangelion film, for example, by that I mean Evangelion 1.0, the rebuild films, made about $18.8 million total in Japan on a budget of probably somewhere around 10 to 15 million. So it made a profit, but I don't want to say a slim one, but a moderate profit.
Better than some shows.
Right. Yeah. Certainly it wasn't in the red. And that's one of the reasons why 2.0 had a look better, because they had the money to be able to go back to the backers and get a larger budget for the later films. But that's
a huge, huge show.
And compare that to an American film, $18 million is nothing.
Yeah, that's
yeah. And considering how much effort goes into animating these films and special effects and so forth and so on, it's just not a lot. So it's tough. It's really tough to make that work. So that is the fundamental problem, is that nobody is making a lot of money off of anime films, which introduces that larger question of how do we even evaluate Miyazaki's role in the film world and the anime world? He is kind of unique.
Yeah.
So I guess to that point, in a sense, there really is no answer to this. There are Miyazaki is distinctive, and there are other people who can fill a similar role, but no one's ever going to be kind of the next Hayao Miyazaki. It just can't be. I do see Hosoda filling a similar role to an extent, but it really, really depends. I think, and that also gets back to the fact that, Miyazaki built Studio Ghibli for very specific reasons, because he had very specific goals, a specific production process he wanted to follow. And no one else is really doing that. Hosoda is making films at an existing studio. He doesn't mind working with Madhouse to make his films. So he doesn't need his own staff with doing everything in house according to all of his own rules, the way Miyazaki does, where he's like, "Oh, this is how it has to be done," and this is, I have to control everything. I don't know.
Ooh.
Which brings up the larger question, which Angel of Death brings up an aspect of that. So let's assume that let's assume that there is no replacement for Miyazaki. Hosoda is out there doing an occasional family film that does reasonably well, but it's not a big breakout success or anything. And there are some folks internationally that recognize him, and he gets some nice reviews here and there, but there's certainly no big Miyazaki push. What will that do to anime? How will that affect anime internationally? Is that going to be a significant blow to the adoption of anime internationally? One of the great things Miyazaki has done has been as that ambassador, if you will, where that's where so many people get into anime, especially as young kids getting a copy of Kiki's Delivery Service from their parents who said, "Oh, Ebert said this is a good film, so I'll buy it." And their kids watch it and they love it, and then they go on to from that to whatever else. Without that, is that going to hurt the anime industry? What do you think?
That's a good question. I suspect that if the newcomers to the field, or I say newcomers, but probably they've been in the industry quite a while, but now they have new power. If they keep a style that keeps the animated movies, in the more fantasy and abstract realm, and what I mean by that is something that's universally accepted. A lot of Miyazaki's films have a more universal approach. They're not specifically Japan, cultural stuff that you can only understand if you have some background in Japanese culture. They have a universal appeal.
Yeah.
So they can easily be translated into other languages and still have an impact on the country or group of people who speak that language without any sort of effort on the part of specific fans. You
Right.
can, you can get a general audience that may not watch anime, but watches an animated film now and then. And I think if they take it in that direction, they can still get that appeal. And one of the things is having the network where you can publicize, hey, this is coming out, and going to the theater and saying, yeah, I support animated films, and they do look at all the figures. So when they have a release, or when people buy the DVDs, it really makes an impact, because they do keep track of those numbers. And it's one thing to fan it, but that doesn't keep them fed. So talking about it with other folks is kind of nice, but somebody will fill a gap if there's a need. It's just to what degree can they effectively, and
that gets back to the kind of the subtlety of the issue, where there are so many things that are sort of quasi needs, right? Like nobody needs to make anime successful internationally. If it's successful internationally, that's great. People want that, but there are very few anime creators who are thinking, okay, we have to make sure this plays well in Sweden, right? They'll make it so that Swedish people aren't going to be completely confused. But point being, that is something that Miyazaki has given us through his universal appeal. Since we're not going to have that, possibly, is that going to fall by the wayside?
I think whoever takes that approach will have success on the international market if they can get it directed to the distribution channels. If they don't take it in that direction, I think, of course, the appeal is going to be limited, and that'll be based on how much penetration there is for anime style animation, and people who are a little bit knowledgeable fans, basically anime fans in each of the countries. And that can be, there's varying levels of anime fans. There's anime fans everywhere, which is amazing. I've been talking with on My Otaku, I run into people all over the world, and it's incredible to see some of the places that people come from. And I always wonder, well, how do you get your anime? What language do you listen to it in? And of course, everybody prefers to know Japanese, but we don't all know it. But, so we listen or read in our own language when we can't.
And Desert Fox brings up an interesting point in the chat room, is sort of the question of animation literacy, which is, do anime fans really want that sort of high quality, very... and quality is kind of a slippery word, but that sort of butter smooth animation, and that very naturalistic animation of Studio Ghibli.
How abstract can they go and limit their budget and still produce a product that people want to watch?
Right. And otaku often want that heavily stylized anime that Miyazaki does not make. So and that gets to that whole thing that Miyazaki is arguably bringing in people who aren't otaku, but then are they actually going to like the anime that's out there, because it's not like Miyazaki stuff? So is that even kind of a border that's going to work anymore? Because folks are going to it's kind of difficult to go from Kiki's Delivery Service to Trigun.
That's a bit of a leap.
It's very different, or a certain magical index. There's a very different kind of approaches.
Just Munster mentioned something, that the whole idea of OVAs. I mean, and crowdsourcing. This is an opportunity where we can see where people will put their money where their mouth is. But of course, you don't know what the end product is necessarily till you see it.
Right.
So what has success after it's made will kind of probably drive the trend, the larger trend as a whole. But it's going to take release, aim, release, aim, release, aim. So it may be a sort of a rocky time as things are going through.
And we've seen a fair number of crowdfunded anime projects over the past few years. Most of them have failed, which is normal for crowdfunding. But we do have a few here and there that have made some where the crowdfunding has certainly met its goal, but we haven't necessarily seen the results of those yet. Not most of them. Still waiting. So the big and we've certainly not yet seen a crowdfund for a complete series yet. We see crowdfunding for a single episode or a single short film, things along those lines, but nothing really has taken hold and delivered yet on that promise.
Well, that money feedback loop is very important, because what gets paid for gets repeated. And Angel of Death brings up a kind of a good question here. Do we have a discussion on how to change anime for the better? And I think part of that is worth discussion in a future episode, because there is that feedback loop, and a lot of people run into the problem of, hey, my favorite anime didn't come out with the next season. We've got huge volumes of the manga. And why isn't there another season?
Yeah.
And a lot of that boils down to that money feedback loop. Yes, we have the money to make the first season. Depending upon how that does in sales with that, we might follow up with a second season. If not, we might, shelf it for a little while and see how things go. And if there's enough profit, we might do another one. But they really, it has a lot to do with the feedback of how the releases do.
Yeah.
There's some interplay, of course, merchandising and the manga itself. So print versus video.
Sure.
But that would be a fun episode to do, because
sure, absolutely.
That will really be the gears that will drive this next trend of how things go. Because Miyazaki's backing, there's a difference there, because those aren't coming out of manga, are they? Some of them are adaptations. The Miyazaki.
Oh no. Well,
the stories. So how much of that is based on similar? Now with traditional anime, as you were saying.
So Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli does more original than adaptations, but a lot of their works are adaptations. Kiki's Delivery Service, for example, is based on a novel. Grave of the Fireflies, obviously, is an adaptation of a novel. Whisper of the Heart adapts a manga. And there are a bunch of different things like that where they are kind of going there. I do not believe Miyazaki acknowledged Hideaki Anno as his successor, no, unless it's a joke. He's acknowledged Anno as his friend and as another impressive animator, but I do not believe that Miyazaki acknowledged Anno as his successor. Now, Jonathan Harris and Liquid bring up the Garden of Words.
I want to see that.
I have not seen specifics on its box office. People say it did well, using scare quotes. And indeed, the theatrical run. I would have
gone had I known it was in theaters somewhere near me.
It wasn't. But the theatrical run in Japan was extended, which indicates it was doing well. But again, the problem is we don't know how well. But this does bring up the interesting question of, is Makoto Shinkai someone who could be considered the next Hayao Miyazaki? That's an interesting question. He certainly is doing more broad family-friendly works. He's doing more adult-oriented works, I would argue. His works are things about more mature things than a lot of Hayao Miyazaki's more kid-friendly and kid-focused things. So obviously Totoro and Kiki are about children, whereas Shinkai tends to be about late teenagers and early adults, and very focused on those things. I don't get a sense that Shinkai has really broken out of the anime, I was going to say ghetto, but I think otaku know him and love him, and I think he has a slightly larger reputation than just otaku, but I don't get the sense that a lot of folks in Japan know his name and rush to see his films. But that could definitely change, and he certainly is in that realm of being somebody making interesting adult or interesting,
more mature
films about life, about normal things. What's interesting about Shinkai, though, is after he does less fantasy and sci-fi tinged things, or more accurately, if his works have fantasy and sci-fi in them, they're much more in the background.
So more drama based,
more drama-based, more melodramatic. So The Garden of Words, obviously, is much more about
romance,
just normal people.
drama.
But even The Place Promised in our early days, while there are sci-fi elements, those are more there to provide a context for that drama between the characters. So that's another interesting aspect and twist on it. It's hard to see. Satoshi Kon was certainly, I think, poised to sit in Miyazaki's shadow. He was definitely making films that people in Japan were turning up to see. Paprika was getting a lot of attention, but unfortunately he did pass away.
Yeah.
So
2010.
sounds
at
right.
age 46.
Yeah.
Too soon.
So too soon. And Kon had the advantage that he had a very distinctive style and approach to his films. So they certainly weren't Miyazaki-like, but they had that vision and that drive where he was doing things on his own, that kind of auteur filmmaker.
Paranoid
view.
Agent is
yeah.
very different from a lot of
Absolutely
styles there.
So yeah, and of course the advantage of Kon too is that since his works are relatively limited in number, it's pretty easy to get caught up on his stuff. Only a few films and TV series and a couple of OVA stuff.
Perhaps this will be a good opportunity to see scripts that are outside of the ordinary enter into the realm of anime. Maybe not just what's based on manga, maybe some traditional science fiction, some stuff that's been floating around for a while that has gone through different revisions. I think Neuromancer has been played around with for a number of years, but never really gone into an animation. And the style of these studios would be perfect for that kind of story, because it's something that would require just unbelievable amounts for live action, but could really be done well in an anime style.
Angel of Death asks in the chat room, with Miyazaki gone, is anime doomed to a niche existence? This actually gets back to something that Anno said recently, Hideaki Anno, that it's getting increasingly difficult for creatives in the anime industry to make original works, meaning that it's easy to adapt manga. It's easy to get the money to and the resources to adapt something, but it's increasingly difficult to come up with your own idea and get the funding to make a film or a TV series based on that original idea.
Plus, with manga, you almost have storyboard work done already. So adapting a novel is a lot more work because there's no storyboards, and so the adaptation process is trickier.
And we're talking about not even adapting anything. We're talking about having here is my idea. We're going to do this completely original thing. That's just it's just really hard. It's harder to do. And I say that think back to earlier, and you look at Gundam, Macross, Evangelion. Pretty much all of Yoshiyuki Tomino's works are original. So there were a lot more original anime back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we're seeing less and less of that today, because it's expensive, and it's risky, and we're seeing the anime industry right now shrink away from that. So the bigger question is that temporary, or is that going to be a factor? And to be clear, even Anno was not saying that there will never be any more original anime. That's too extreme. But the question is, will original anime be less common now than it was in the past? Is that the new normal?
That kind of worries me, because you need a bigger machine. And when I say machine, the whole process, people involved to crank out something original now.
Right.
Because everybody's expecting quality if it's something original, which requires more people, more money, and everything. But I think this creates a great opportunity for somebody to take a big risk.
It's certainly, yeah.
They nothing risk, nothing gained. And
Right.
if we see sort of a new Wild West in animation here, add in new technology, changing support, new distribution methods. Suddenly everybody's going file based, and streaming is, nobody wants a hard copy anymore. Revenue for that has to be changed. And so the idea of streaming and then keeping track of who actually streams it, who pays for what streams, and what's going to get repeated. It's going to be all sort of a turbulent time with that direction.
And that's a very good point, that it's quite likely that we're currently in a period of where we're going through great changes in the fundamentals of the business of how you make money off of anime. Whenever that happens, folks get more conservative. You have to circle the wagons, just as happened a decade ago or longer than that, when the Japanese economy shrunk, and everyone circled the wagons and did those things. Now, Liquid points out in the chat room, anime is certainly already niche. I mean,
yeah, you mentioned anime.
There's no
average office, and you might get some folks who know what it is, and everybody's like, "What's that?"
The vast majority of folks, even in Japan, are not watching anime. It is absolutely a niche in every country in the world. But the question is it going to become essentially a supplement to the manga and novel industry, as opposed to a vibrant creative industry in and of itself? Will there be a significant amount of new creative works coming out of anime that then moves on into pop culture the way Gundam and other things did?
This is a good question. Will non-otaku pay for and watch anime? And I think we've seen some success with U.S. animation bringing the idea of animation to an adult viewing audience. Oh, it's not just cartoons. There's adult viewing audience. So mature themes like, from basic things like South Park to Archer. Archer is definitely not a kid's show.
Yeah.
But somebody sees that, they say, oh, okay, cartoons. Okay, well, not cartoons. There's animation for adults. And there's only so much in the US, but there's this whole library of Japanese stuff. I think it will gradually move in that direction as the U.S. culture adopts more animation based, and especially with the technology making it more affordable for U.S. companies to make animation and bring it into the culture.
That's a very good point. And I think things like Clone Wars and Rick and Morty are both great examples of shit. I mean, Clone Wars is hugely popular with kids and adults. And I think people have recognized that there is, in America, that there is a market for those shows. We've struggled with this, and they struggle in Japan with it, as well. This idea of recognizing animation as a more mature, art form. And I don't think we're ever going to quite get to that point where every American every American's watching anime. It's just not going to happen. But we
can hope.
Well, no, I mean, we're not all going to, become football fans either. It's fine. The point is, will anime be a vibrant thing? However many fans it has, will it be a creative force? Is the thing.
Well, here's another question about the comparison of hard copy anime versus digital versions, and I think we're still going through the growing phase of trying to find a safe and secure way of distributing and having a payment system. It's still kind of shaking out. As far as the actual material, being able to stream it is less expensive, but only after you've paid for the infrastructure to do that. Right. So getting the hard drive arrays that have zero failure, 5+9s of failure, keeping those spinning, paying for the electricity and the redundancy, the backup generator, so everybody doesn't say, hey, the streaming service has been down for how long in a database to keep track of all that. So it's a change in the way the business model is doing it. So initially it's going to be expensive up front, but it's going to get probably progressively less expensive as they refine that.
On the other side of that too is the structure of the business. So this is helpful to understand. The way this is kind of structured in Japan, as I understand it, is that you have your production committee that funds it, and one of the member companies that's involved in that is a DVD distribution company, right? And so they pay in money to the production to be involved in it. In return, they get the rights to make the DVDs. That company then presses the DVDs and sells them. So the important thing here is that there's a difference between that company and the animation studio and everyone else who's making money off of it. They're taking on the risk by putting in the money. They're the ones spending the money on the DVDs. Shifting to digital doesn't necessarily make more money because that's shifting to a different company that has a different cost structure and is paying a different amount for that. So
it's funny. We were looking into some encoders recently for a job I was doing, and encoders can cost a lot if you're doing business level encoding, and it's pretty pricey on the front end. But once you get a system that's put together, those are incredible. I mean, it's leaps beyond people's home PCs. Developing it, streaming it, it's pretty incredible.
And that gets kind of the a deeper question of advancements in technology, right? 5-10 years ago, streaming was practically impossible in the sense of getting all of that infrastructure running. Nobody was doing that, so you had to build it all from scratch.
A little bit here, a little bit there. This person's trying it out.
Yeah, and so now you can leverage. Now a company can just say, "Oh, hey, Crunchyroll, here are the files." There's still a lot of work to be done for that, but
metadata, subtitles, licensing.
Oh, huge.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But a lot of the fundamental infrastructure is being worked out. So 5 years from now, even 1 or 3 years from now, many of these problems will be at the very least understood, and thus prices will be stabilized and folks will be able to react to that and understand how to handle it. But it is kind of complex.
I gotta say though, I love having a hard copy, and there's nothing like seeing a box designed by somebody with artwork, and you get a poster or a book with the design stuff. It's something that I can hold in my hand. Little stuff that they throw in with the release boxes. I know there's a space for the save editions because I can afford it.
Yeah,
but when I see those special edition boxes, there's not a lot of them that get made. So getting one of those is great. I mean, I can put it on my shelf. I can share it. I can, and seeing it, it's, so there, I think for me, there's always a different feel to something I can hold in my hand that I can walk around with. And if I go up into on vacation into a spot where there's no internet connection, yeah, they do exist. I can watch my shows.
And that's where the money is made, but that's a different topic. Cool. So we've been going for about an hour. I think we have covered this in great detail. I want to thank everyone in the chat room for joining us for this conversation. We're going to hang out for a little bit in the chat room once we're done with the video stream. If you're looking for more videos like this, please stop on by geekarchaeologists.com, where we talk about a new topic every single week, something about anime and lots of other things. Coming up soon, in fact, next week, we'll be talking about another topic quite related to this, actually. The question, has Hayao Miyazaki been good or bad for anime?
He's not anime.
Wow, indeed.
What?
So we're going to talk about Miyazaki's legacy and impact and the positive and negative aspects that has on the future. So, for example, did he create unrealistic expectations in the world for what anime is like?
He's so good.
And
how am I going to make that?
Right. And, as we were saying, you have folks who watch Kiki's Delivery Service and then somebody, hands them something else. It's like, that's not what I thought it would be.
So, what did they do with my song, Mom?
So I hope you'll join us next week. We've got plenty of other stuff coming up as well.
And just a heads up, if you want to continue the conversation after we close out the YouTube channel, there's a forum in My Otaku myotaku.com has a spot for news and discussion where you can continue and also meet a whole bunch of really cool folks who have similar interests.
Absolutely. Please go over there, follow the conversation, follow us on Twitter, Gearchaeologists. It's where we tweet now, and you'll get we tweet about our schedule and other stuff. Yeah. Oh, well. And we hope we will see you in the future. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for joining.
Take care. See ya.